right. So thank you guys for showing up today. I'm going to give a little presentation. It shouldn't be too crazy long, but I just want to tell our story here. We have all the stuff out here for you guys to look at, ask questions about. We have a long history as a national fraternity, and we have a long history here on campus. So I'm going to start the presentation off talking a little bit about our national founding, and then I'm going to go into our history at Cleveland State. We used to be Fenn College, and we used to be LTD. I'll talk a lot about that and how we changed into SigEp and how we became the chapter we are now. But first, I got to start us off with this guy right here. Our story starts off very humble. Carter Ashton Jenkins, that's the name of this individual. He's a name that you all should probably memorize because he's a very important player. He's our founder. And when he transferred to Richmond College in 1899, he was 18 years old. He transferred from Rutgers College to Richmond College, a school that only had 300 people, and I believe it already had 4 fraternities on campus. And he was at Rutgers, he was in Chi Phi, which is a really old fraternity. Don't know much about them, but he was already in Chi Phi when he transferred, and there was no chapter for Chi Phi at Richmond. So what he wanted to do was create a chapter at Richmond College. So he started meeting with some people. 6 people turned into 12 eventually. They started calling themselves the Saturday Night Club. They just kind of met every Saturday night. Nothing major. It wasn't until he finally decided, like, hey, I want to create a Chi Phi chapter here at Richmond. And you guys, I mean, you probably all know the deal with fraternities on campus. It was no different back then. Typically, fraternities were seen as, this group of guys who would go out and party all the time, not typically seen as something to be taken seriously even back then. And a lot of the 12, I think 7 of those 12 original members were training to be ordained ministers. So they really wanted something that would align with their values. And Carter, he assured them that it would, but eventually they were on board with it, but the national fraternity really turned them down because, again, only 300 students, and they already had 4 fraternities. They just figured it would be very difficult for them to grow. So some time went on, and eventually he said, screw it, I want to start something new. They started calling themselves, at first I believe they started calling themselves Sigma Phi. He eventually went to the faculty to get them officially recognized, and when there was some pushback and they said, what could we benefit from another fraternity on campus, Carter and a couple of the other founders met with faculty and they said, quote, this fraternity will be different. They said that it will be based on the love of God and peace through brotherhood. And that was kind of their selling point, that this fraternity will be different. We're serious about this. And like they obviously, again, 7 out of the 12 were wanting to be ordained ministers, and they really believed in its values and how it really aligned with them. So they were recognized shortly after that. In November, I believe it's November 1st, 1901, they officially were recognized at Richmond College and then worked later down the road to become a national fraternity. So that's just like a quick cliff notes on our national founding. But meanwhile, around 20 years later, here's the original 12. That's Carter. I wish I had a list of everybody else. It's all online. But Carter Ashton Jenkins is the original founder. This is the original 12 that established Sigma Phi Epsilon at Richmond College. But meanwhile, on another part of the country, Fenn College was sort of in its birthing years. Starting in 1881, it started off as a YMCA, educational branch. I'm not sure how many people actually know this, but we were, part of Youth Men's Christian Association education branch. And then it wasn't until the 20s when we actually started beginning to offer college-level courses. And then eventually went through a rebranding and changed our name to Fenn College. And then early student life started forming at Fenn College. By 1927, there were a couple clubs, drama club, debate club, There were 2 fraternities, mostly in business and things like that. We only offered a couple degrees. There was like there was engineering, business, and commerce, and that was it. But it was enough to call ourselves a college, instead of just, you know, an educational program. And then not long after, some of the student life started growing on campus. Not long after that was the founding of Lambda Tau Delta. And I know that this isn't SigEp quite yet, but it's important to know what we were before we were SigEp. And before we were SigEp, we were considered a local fraternity, which is just like it's a smaller scale. It's only university, college level fraternity. It's not nationally recognized, but it's still significant on campus. And it was established in 1929 with 9 members. Founded on principles of high scholastic achievements, which is something that we still value today. It's something that will be very important when we decide what we eventually want to go to, when we start to recognize or we start to associate with a national organization of what we kind of want our values to be. But yeah, it was founded on high scholastic achievements, scholars mostly, and it would soon undergo some very big changes in the coming years. So it's 1929 right now, and we just founded Lambda Tau Delta. Fenn College is in its early years. And then over the next couple of years, the country sees a lot of changes. So first off, during the Depression years, surprisingly, the school does pretty well. We're able to grow during the Depression years. It's around this time when we actually buy Fenn Tower. From a struggling business, we actually are able to buy Fenn Tower during this time, and the campus actually starts to grow. So we make some pretty good decisions during these years. And then LTD also grows in manpower as well. It actually wasn't until World War II when LTD eventually closed down, because a lot of the men in the fraternity have to go out and or are committed to joining the war effort, and eventually it has to close down temporarily because there's just no one in attendance. By 1946, immediately opened back up with 19 new members. So students started attending Fenn College again on the GI Bill, and this really helped LTD start back up with 19 new members, and then growth would persist after this well into the 60s. And then another important thing that happened in the 1960s was our official changing of Lambda Tau Delta into SigEp. So at this time, a lot of fraternities are starting to associate and kind of be absorbed by larger national fraternities. And Lambda Tau Delta was one of the last ones to do this, but they figured it was time to jump on that train. And so they really look at what fraternity starts to, what fraternity kind of aligns with their values and their ideals. And they end up choosing SigEp based on, they have high ideals of scholastic achievement. They're, again, SigEp was originally founded on the ideals of creating peace through brotherhood and, strong relationships with God and things like that. And they determined on November 21st, 1964, officially, that that's what aligned the best with them. And it officially formed Ohio New as we know it today. So then after that founding, SigEp Ohio New was pretty much in its heyday for the next 20 or so years, 20, 30 years. SigEp grew along with the university. So the university continued to grow and expand. In the 1960s, SigEp at CSU became pretty much the chapter to beat. We ended up growing to 100 members at one point in the 60s. And every year we start. There's the trophy here. I could talk a little bit about that now. That's the All Sports Trophy. That one's from, I think, 1966. So we started this tradition of winning this trophy every single year, and that's kind of established our presence on the fraternity as this fraternity to beat at the time. And like Dave will say, like, the alumni would give them hell if they didn't, if for whatever reason they didn't win this trophy. So it was a big deal. Another big deal. In 1979, we became the first Northeast Ohio chapter to receive the Buchanan Cup. So Buchanan Cup is awarded to SigEp chapters who have high achievement and are basically the top tier of chapters on their campus. And we became the first to get that in Northeast Ohio. I think Case Western followed shortly afterward. Yeah, and then we also got a fraternity house on 36th Street. So 100-year-old mansion. It's in the next slide here. This is an old picture of our fraternity house. Doesn't currently exist, but it was really nice to have. There's the sign that would hang up right here. This sign apparently got stolen or something like that, but this sign right here is actually the sign that was hung up around this area, and there's a picture of it being hung up, so there's a piece of history there. That's in the archives usually. All right, and then after our heyday sort of ended, starting in around the 80s, became sort of a downfall in campus participation in campus life, particularly Greek life. So Cleveland State became, by the way, I should also mention that during the 60s, one of the changes was Fenn College being rebranded into Cleveland State. Something I failed to mention, but you see here, Cleveland State became a commuter school in the 80s. So by the time the 80s rolled around, participation in Greek life and in campus life started going downhill a little bit. It was seen as less of a priority. Ohio New closed. Despite efforts to try and prevent that, it closed and remained dormant, and the fraternity house got sold and torn down, unfortunately, which always makes me sad because it was such a beautiful house. But unfortunately, yeah, just on account of residence life going down, became a commuter school. We ended up having to close for a while. But that's when sort of the heroes of their story kind of come into play. So Dave and Bill Schutte here, and this is a banner that we still actually have. Maybe one day we'll get it hung back up on that banister, but for now, these are the heroes of our story. So they were the very big names in our rechartering and recolonization. So by 2010s, CSU wanted to make efforts to kind of grow resident life, grow Greek life. And Dave Hewitt, Bill Schutte, and Parker Keating really were the biggest players in our recolonization in 2013. That eventually led to our rechartering in 2017. So the picture here, this is Parker Keating, Bill Schutte, and Dave, and then our rechartering president, Paul All. And he's filling out the request for a recharter in this photograph. And then these are the 40 members that we had during the rechartering period. So that's the requirement to get rechartered is you need, I think it's a minimum of 40 members or somewhere around there. And then you need SLC accreditation, you need a ton of other qualifications. And thanks to Dave, Bill, and Parker, and then Paul, we managed to get all that, and we managed to recharter officially in 2017. And then this was the rechartering class. I don't know if you guys recognize any of these people. A lot of them now are AVC volunteers. Like there's Keegan, Paul's up there. There's a couple faces. And yeah, that pretty much brings us up to the present.